What's up, Ego Hackers? Welcome to Season 32, Episode 7. This is Lectures Premium Edition for the Journeyman membership. Special thanks to all of our Journeyman members who have been going out of their way to financially support the movement of what we're doing here with the Ego Hacker community, csjoseph.life. The upcoming Ego Hackers YouTube channel. It's about to be releasing in the very near future. Also, Ego Hacking Your Fear. And then shortly after that, Ego Hacking Love Language, which is going to be an amazing course. I already have it outlined. It's going to be incredible. This is the first time I've officially mentioned it. It will be coming out probably start taking pre-orders right after the Ego Hacking Your Fear Masterclass. I gotta be honest, folks, the Love Languages particular series is going to be absolutely bomb. It's going to be incredible. We're going to be going into depth on the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone as presented in the Ego Hacking by Text Masterclass. If you haven't got the Masterclass, you really should, or even Ego Hacking by Text, that's egohackingbytext.com, buy the course, and then you'll have an opportunity to buy the Masterclass as well. Or if you buy Ego Hacking Your Fear with its masterclass, you'll have an opportunity to get a really nice bundled deal with Ego Hacking by Text after the fact, if you don't already have it. So you might want to check out that discount. It's pretty awesome. I think it's like buy Ego Hacking by Text, get the masterclass for free or something like that. It's pretty amazing. So welcome back to downtown Coeur d'Alene. My favorite place in the world, one of my favorite places in the world, actually. Look forward to being able to do this in the Vegas Strip, actually. Going to be producing some shows down there. Going to be setting up on the side of the street and claiming, hey, I'm a psychic, free reading, and I'll give you a bottle of water if you do a reading with me, right? Who's going to say no to that? And then I record it. And then at the end of it, I'd be like, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not a psychic. I'm actually a psychologist for the lulz. You know what I'm saying? Kind of a business card, send them off, right? I'm sure that'll be a fantastic addition to the show. If I'm lucky, I'll be able to score some typing people on the streets later today. So anyway, Season 32, Episode 7, we're discussing the ENTP archetype, my own archetype, which... it's going to be a great episode if I'm talking about myself, right? What person out there does not enjoy talking about themselves? I mean, I know I do. No, not really. But I do. So does everybody. This comes from a concept from the book written by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Get people to talk about themselves, and you're more likely to have a really good relationship with them. Talking to strangers is like my favorite thing to do. So, what is the octagram? What is the octagram? The octagram is basically this thing that helps us measure human nurture. We've been working on this for a very long time. I have to give special thanks to Robert Potts, John Bodine, Chris Taylor, with their assistance in the development of the octagram. The octagram is our version of the Enneagram. And the Enneagram has some problems with it. The Enneagram, it basically combines nature with nurture. And honestly, Enneagram is basically its own separate system. And one of the most annoying things about the Enneagram is how people use the Enneagram. And that basically is they combine the Enneagram with MBTI. And MBTI is nature only, and then you have nature plus nurture. It's really frustrating. So what we did is we took the nature components out of the Enneagram and then have only nurture in terms of the octagram. People are like, okay, well, it's nice that that's the case, Mr. C.S. Joseph, but when it comes to the octagram, you only have 4 octagram variants. So what's so octa about the octagram? And really, that comes from the 2 temple wheels. Every single person has 2 temple wheels. This comes from having two cognitive origins, right? So for the ENTP, that's satisfaction and reverence. That's me. Satisfaction and reverence. I'm all about satisfaction and reverence. So is Andrew Tate, you know what I'm saying? God, like, it's so weird because, like, I've been having to come to grips with, like, my similarities to the guy. You know, I do martial arts, I smoke cigars, I play hard when I do play, I love hard when I do love, and I love hard. You know, not only that, like, from a BDSM perspective, I'm a rigger. So it's hilarious because, like, literally on my person at all times, I always have cuffs, just in case. They're pretty nice, actually. I actually really like them. They're also very kind of soft yet firm. Soft yet firm. Very nice. So, anyway. So, yeah, don't rely on the Enneagram, rely on the Octagram. But the 8 pieces of the Octagram basically come from the 2 temple wheels. So you have your satisfaction wheel, which is also known as your ego wheel, and then you have your super ego wheel, also known as your shadow wheel, basically. I'll say shadow wheel from time to time. It also has its 4 pieces. The 4 pieces being 2 of which are deadly sins. So you basically have 2 deadly sins, 2 living virtues. That's the first 4 pieces of the Octagram. Then you have your shadow pole, and then you have your aspiration pole, okay? And those are the other 4 pieces because you have 2 each in terms of both of your wheels, for a total of 8 spokes attached to the temple wheels. And each of those spokes have different, they have different expressions, basically. A lot of different expressions. And those expressions, at the end of the day, they really, really matter. Oftentimes, people are not entirely sure how to even, like, go after each of these things and how to type from an Octagram perspective. But we're actually going to be going really, really in depth on this in the upcoming Ego Hacking Your Fear Masterclass. It's going to be really centered around Octagram and how you can actually have an opportunity to hack your ego hack your own Octagram, basically, and maybe even give yourself an opportunity to adjust your cognitive focus over time so that you can get over your fear and become more aspirational in your life. That's ultimately what we are trying to do. And I think that's great. Having that opportunity, being able to use your nurture, it's awesome. Not only that, like, from an ego hacking perspective, ego hacking somebody from their nurture is actually the fastest way to ego hack someone to get an actual result. We'll also be discussing that in the masterclass as well. So this is the first time I've really talked about what's in the Ego Hacking Your Fear masterclass, a little bit more in depth than what we have on the sales page, but that's what it's all about. It's going to be an amazing masterclass. You're not going to want to miss it. We're not really going to be discussing much of its contents anywhere else in the same way that we've done with the Ego Hacking by Text masterclass, because both of those, let's just say that we need an opportunity to really use the masterclass to give some real value to help people reach mastery with each of these pieces. So yeah, that's basically what the Octagram is each of these 8 different items, 2 deadly sins, 2 living virtues, 2 shadow poles, and 2 aspiration poles, for a total of 8 pieces, and their different expressions basically make up a person's Octagram. This is all organized on the Octagrid, and we'll be talking about the Octagrid in the upcoming masterclass as well. Hopefully it will be in downloadable form. At least that's my goal. Which, if you ask me, is entirely exciting. Very exciting. So yeah, we'll be checking that out. So, Octagram is the interpretation of how nurture impacts our nature. There are 4 paths of nurtural development. Whereas the Enneagram may try to combine nurture with a bit of nature, the Octagram is pure nature, separated from nature, a pure nurture, separated from nature, but demonstrating how nurture shapes the expression of our nature. The Octagram reveals 4 nuanced expressions for each type. Octagram is also our version of subtypes and details why each subtype or variant expresses themselves differently. You know, a lot of different people on the MBTI blogosphere talk about subtypes. Like Dave Powers. I love Dave Powers. He's a really great guy. I actually really want to meet him. If anyone knows Dave Powers, like, tell him C.S. Joseph wants to meet him. I'm probably going to be around where he lives in the near future anyway, so why not? I really like the guy. I'd like to have a discussion with him. I used to call him an INTJ. I actually think he's an ENTP. So this lecture would actually be very, very on point for him if you think about it. So yeah. So how does a person's octogram actually form, right? How does it form? And it really comes down to your environment and also something known as soft locking. Soft locking is discussed heavily in the Cutting Edge episode for December 2022. If you haven't watched that episode, it is absolutely critical that you do watch that episode because it is everything. It is everything when it comes to having a fundamental, basic understanding of the octogram and how the octogram ultimately forms. But soft locking is basically a process from which your cognitive functions are matching up with other people's cognitive functions in your lives. And this follows a natural pattern of cognitive synchronicity, basically. Cognitive synchronicity, right? Cognitive synchronicity being like, extroverted feeling is going for introverted feeling, right? Introverted functions are presenting themselves, they are producing, and then extroverted functions are consuming, basically, right? So they all just fit together. This is why the golden pair has highest compatibility, because it just directly across. My golden pair, since we're talking about ENTPs in this particular lecture, is the INTJ. INTJ is introvert intuition hero. My extrovert intuition hero is trying to consume introvert intuition hero, right? Their extroverted thinking parent is trying to consume my introverted thinking parent. My extroverted feeling child is trying to consume their introverted feeling child. Their extroverted sensing inferior is trying to consume my introverted sensing inferior, right? So all of this is shared, right? So the thing is that throughout your life, you end up, like for example, you're born to a family, your birth family, right? And you don't get to choose the cognition of these people. Not by any means. Not by any means. You don't get to choose the cognition. You don't get to choose your parents, basically. You don't get to choose your aunts and uncles, grandmas, grandpas, brothers and sisters, cousins, whatever. You don't get to choose any of that. Not at all. And each of them has their own nature. Each of them has their own psyche, basically. So when you as a child interact with these people, their functions are naturally trying to find their counterparts, their synchronous counterparts from a compatibility perspective, inside of your mind, as much as your functions are doing the same to them. What this does is that this ends up soft locking you, basically. So, for example, my father is extroverted feeling hero, and my introverted feeling trickster is the only introverted feeling he can lock onto, because the core principle of soft locking is basically that optimistic cognitive functions can only match with optimistic cognitive functions. Pessimistic cognitive functions can only match with pessimistic cognitive functions, right? That's the only place it can happen. Woo! Lost the ash. I guess I'm being a smart ash today. So, it's really key. Really key you understand soft locking, because, for example, my father would soft lock me into my INTJ shadow with his extroverted feeling hero. He would also soft lock me into my ISFJ subconscious with his introvert intuition parent. He would soft lock me also into my ISFJ subconscious with his extroverted sensing child, right? So he was constantly, his gateway functions were soft locking me into my shadow, my INTJ shadow. His guidance functions were soft locking me into my ISFJ subconscious. My mother, however, that became far more interesting, because she would be soft locking me into my superego on a consistent basis. So because of this different soft locking involved with my parents, and then also same thing with my sister because she's my conflict type, I basically was soft locked into my ESFP superego on a regular basis, right? So by default, you kind of just know that based on a person's compatibility with their parents, with their immediate family that they're born into, you can pretty much tell just right off the bat if they're going to be unconscious developed or subconscious developed. Because cognitive development really just comes as a result, right? It comes as a result of, how you were in your childhood and how you were being soft locked, by people in your childhood. That's basically what it represents. So our environment forces us to prefer one side of the mind over the other. Our family, communities, and life experiences we face pressure our brains through neuroplasticity to adapt to our environment. Soft locking is the engine for octogram neural development. Environment either enables or disables the expression of our ego, and in my case, My ego was entirely disabled, if not ignored, by my family growing up, right? If you cannot express your ego fully in your environment, the pressure will lead you to other sides of your mind, because you're going to develop neural pathways in order to utilize other cognitive functions to be able to get your mind into like a survival state to survive the soft locking that's happening through, by your family. So as you get soft locked more and more and more, as a result of that, it's like your brain is getting etched, basically. And, you're using these pathways. You're like a trailblazer. It's kind of hard at first, but then eventually it becomes second nature. It's kind of like training. Let's say you're left-handed and you were forced to right-handed as a child. It's like training your brain to adjust your handedness, which, oddly enough, I've actually had to do in order to play certain video games, because some video games never allowed me to play inverted on, like for a first-person shooter. So I'd actually have to learn how to play not inverted, which was really frustrating. And then I would go back to it later, on games that I could. Thank God for Halo, So that's always been an issue. So, however, your psyche is always trying to still activate its cognitive origin, even from a different side of the mind, which means eventually you're always going to try to go back to your ego. And that's basically what happened to me when I moved away from my family and then went to college. I was allowed to basically be who I was on my own. Sadly, I was just a giant edgelord in college, and which ended up presenting a lot of problems later. But it's still an issue. It's still a big issue regardless. But regardless, soft locking refines your ego, which is ego enablement, or expands it, ego disablement, forcing expansion to the other sides of the mind. Soft locking is the result of your life circumstances pushing you along the path to enlightenment, also known as cognitive integration. If you want to learn more about cognitive integration, I highly recommend you guys watch Season 19, especially in preparation for the Ego Hacking Your Fear course. Luckily, when you buy Ego Hacking Your Fear at egohackingyourfear.com, you get Season 19 by default, and you can start watching it, and it's not a big deal. It's pretty awesome. Okay? So, archetype plus origin divided by soft locking equals your octagram. Always remember that process. So ENTPs are seeking satisfaction, also known as contentment, fullness, meaning, and to be a sponge to drink up other people's desire and passion. Also, a sponge to drink up other people's effort. Okay? Because the love language of the ENTP is acts of service. Oftentimes, we produce acts of service for other people, and it can make us happy to do so with our ISFJ subconscious, but the ENTP ego absolutely gets off on receiving acts of service from other people. We just love being serviced. It's a really big deal. It's a huge deal for me. I love receiving effort from other people. Even if the result isn't that great, I highly appreciate and love effort. Effort is everything to me. Giving effort, knowing that my effort is being appreciated, and me showing appreciation for other people's effort, it's a really, really big deal, especially in my sexual relationships. Especially there. Effort is ultimately everything. Right? Paradigm shifts, such as moving out of your house, taking on a new lover, changing careers or jobs, having a child, or starting over in a new city, often forces paradigm shifts in your psyche. This changes your cognitive focus. Cognitive focus is more variable, whereas cognitive development is far more static. Childhood determines cognitive development, and adolescence determines your first cognitive focus. As you age and circumstances change, your focus changes along with it. And honestly, your development can change too. It won't change like on a dime like cognitive focus. Cognitive focus could actually potentially change on a weekly basis depending on the circumstances you're in. But also, from that perspective, in what social circles you are or how you're being soft-locked by other people, your cognitive focus can change rapidly. That's just like an adaptation thing that, from human evolution perspective, we have the opportunity to be able to adapt to our environment. That's why the human brain is entirely adaptable. That is why ultimately we have neuroplasticity, and Octagram and our human nurture is at the end of the day proof of that nurture. It really is proof. That's why it's such a big deal. A very big deal. So development, however, development can change too, but it might take decades. Let's say your development is pretty solidified as a child. Your development can actually change over time, potentially over the course of decades. You could have been unconscious, developed, like as a child ultimately, but it is possible, like maybe over the course of 20 or 30 years, your development can actually change over time. It is possible, although very improbable and potentially impractical, very impractical. And that too can be a problem for many, or it can be a good thing. So what are the 4 variants of the ENTP, right? Cognitive origin of satisfaction. You have the living virtue of compassion. Also, you have the living virtue of modesty, right? Then you have the deadly sin of envy and the deadly sin of vainglory at the same time. You also have fanaticism and egotism for your aspiration poles, and your shadow poles are malevolence versus desecration, right? Those are ultimately the 8 temple wheel spokes that make up your personal octagram for your human nurture, basically, okay? So that's how that works, right? So the first variant is the SDSF ENTP, also known as the Joy Octagram. Now, I got to give thanks to Elliot Woodhead, aka Lane, for coming up with this concept, taking the 4 variants of the octagram and then matching it to Strauss and Howe theory. So Strauss and Howe, they wrote the book The Fourth Turning. They talk about generational archetypes from a Jungian analytical psychology perspective. But at the same time, those 4 energies, which is joy, decay, hope, and despair, those 4 things definitely map directly back to the octagram. And the SDSF variant, also known as subconscious developed, subconscious focused, for the ENTP is known as the Joy variant of the ENTP. And that is high levels of fanaticism and high levels of compassion. So, and then the theme for that is my duty and helpfulness are my satisfaction. What a great way to live life. I actually know one of these personally. This is our very own Fib, who is an admin on our Discord server. If you're not already on the Discord server, what the hell are you doing? Discord.gg/ego hackers. Get in while you can. No, it'll always be around. Just kidding. Just get in, seriously. And also join the Sexuality Sig. Do yourself a favor. That place is like a huge drama fest, but it's always a really fun read. It's like reading the newspaper every day. It's fun. And our Discord server is like hyperactive, so who wouldn't? So SDSF ENTPs are hyper-developed in their ISFJ subconscious, where they learn to lead with their discipline, endurance, and duty. SDSF ENTPs often steer into obstacles with a certain kind of optimism, finding joy in testing their endurance. And this is literally Fib, like every day. There are times where I'm like, oh man, Fib's really judging me right now, but in reality, he's actually just being hyper-supportive. And it's one of the best things. I absolutely love that about the guy. At first I would be like kind of concerned, worried, or maybe a little afraid about, some of his judgments towards me as I got to know him and as he was, on the team and whatnot. But he is like the most chill person I have ever met. He is so chill all the time. And he is so non-judgmental. He's so like hyper accepting, and it's probably because he's been hyper accepted, which is what often happens to SDSF octagram ENTPs, because extroverted feeling child basically matters, and it matters to the people in their life, in their upbringing, and also it matters to the people in their adulthood. And let me tell you, his extroverted feeling child absolutely does matter. And I'm very happy to have him on the team. Very happy to have him on the team. He's a good man. Very good man. One of the best men I've ever met in my life, actually. To the point where he might be one of the best, if not the best person I've ever met in my life, to be fair. But then again, I could say that about most everyone else on the team as well. Everyone is just such high quality people that, like, oftentimes I'm very envious of them using my deadly sin. And I'm very envious of Fib for sure. And wishing, oh man, I wish I could be a little bit more like him, so I'm like not as much of an edgelord, right? But, let's be honest, I'm kind of cool with being an edgelord because then I get all this attention, and don't get me wrong, I love me some attention. I mean, look at me. I'm filming in downtown Coeur d'Alene and everyone's walking by like, who the hell is this guy? It's fun. I enjoy it. So, these ENTPs are the most likely to come across as affiliative, as they lead more with their extroverted feeling and seek to belong more than other ENTP variants. Not only that, they help other people belong. They help other people belong on, in their surroundings or people in their lives, basically. They're constantly being there for other people instead of really being there for themselves, which is kind of a UDUF thing. Yeah, that's me exposing myself there a little bit. My bad. So, these ENTPs tend to be very optimistic with their TI, having an air of certainty with their thinking, but they also tend to be very forgiving towards others, leading with their compassion and seeking to relieve others' suffering, which is great. Fib does this all the time. He does it for me consistently, and it's one of the reasons why I'm so glad that he's in my life, and I'm so glad he's on the team. Great man. It's just knowing an SDSF ENTP, it's just like, it's really an honor. It's really a big honor. And he's very optimistic. SDSF ENTPs tend to be extremely hard on themselves. Yeah, he is. With perfectionistic tendencies. Oh yeah, he's a perfectionist, but I love that about him. Working extremely hard to contribute to others' lives. To them, independence comes less naturally than other variants. They were supported by others growing up, and they expect others to continue to support them. And that's the thing about my relationship with Fib. I basically give him the opportunity to just do whatever he wants. It's like I allow him the opportunity to take the initiative and just make things better because I trust his judgment in that area. He's constantly looking out for the community. He's a protector of the community, protector of the product, protector of the brand. He's basically becoming a protector of the realm when it comes to the ego hacker community, constantly watching out for everyone, constantly making sure that everyone's on the right path and on the right track. And he just exudes a ton of joy. And then he'll just pull out his violin and share that joy with everybody else, which is great. I've always wanted to play the violin. Sadly, I never got the opportunity. I guess that's what happens when you're so disabled as a child and ultimately disabled as an adult. What's also really cool about SDSF ENTPs is that they don't really have a victim mindset, right? Unconscious focused ENTPs kind of do. So the decay and the despair, octagram variants, they do tend to have a victim mindset. I am extremely guilty of that. In fact, a lot of people who criticize me, a lot of people out there, who have a very low opinion of me, constantly like, oh, Mr. C.S. Joseph, you got a victim mindset. And in some cases, they'd be right. But here's the difference, is that while I may have a victim mindset from time to time, at least I'm willing to share actual real-life details and anecdotes of things that I've been through, and so that other people can relate with that pain and understand where they're coming from and where I'm coming from, so that they can look at themselves and be more accepting of themselves. Because acceptance is extremely important to ENTPs, right? Especially SDSF ENTPs, because acceptance, extroverted feeling, which is acceptance, comes from our God function of extroverted feeling. Because our two God functions are FE and NI. NI is all about personal freedom. So the SDSF octagram variant heavily leans towards the God function of extroverted feeling. Heavily leans. Whereas the SDUF one actually heavily leans on the introverted intuition God function. UDSF heavily leans on extroverted feeling God function, and the UDUF ENTP heavily leans on the introverted intuition God function. It's a big deal. Really big deal. And absolutely amazing. So let's discuss SDUF ENTPs. Fanaticism, envy. And I do know of one in my life. I was actually really hard on him recently. I was hard on him on his birthday, actually. Sometimes I feel bad about that, and sometimes I don't feel bad about that. But regardless, Andres, still love you, bro. Still love you, and thank you for sticking around for the communities. Thank you for sticking around for the men's group. Thanks for sticking around for all of us. Thanks for at least going out of your way to forge your own path and lean into that God function of introverted intuition and forge your own path and find your own way, regardless of what anyone else in your life has ever suggested to you or ever done. I'm glad that you went in the direction that you did, ultimately, and forging your own path. I regret projecting myself onto you for so long, and I realize that that's not exactly healthy. I should have just been trying to really understand your nurture as a decay type. Decay types are really, really important for the world and important for humanity. The reason why is because they're like the ultimate experimentalists. They experiment with everything. They have to break everything down into their small little components or their small little pieces, and as a result of breaking everything down, they get to see what actually matters as a result, what actually matters in life. I think another example of an SDUF ENTP would actually be President Macron of France. He's an SDUF ENTP as well. He's all about decaying things to see if, what actually matters. So it's really fascinating to watch that octagram variant actually basically, from a statesman perspective, how they behave and what they actually do. I find that pretty great. So, the SDUF ENTP, also known as fanaticism plus envy, getting what others have will satisfy me. Oh yeah. They lean in deep on their envy, and they utilize their envy as a tool of motivation to motivate them to move forward in their life, which is great, which is absolutely fantastic. So SDUF ENTPs were enabled in childhood to develop into their ISFJ subconscious, but they were disabled in other environments as they age. SDUF variants are often in the painful process of having to learn things for themselves, just as Andrus has. And I gotta give the guy props and respect, because he never gave up on himself, even though there's so many other people in our friend circle. For example, a particular ENTJ that we know, Mr. Wilson. That ENTJ would give up on Andrus consistently. And honestly, it really frustrated me that he would give up on Andrus so much. And I'm just so glad that Andrus is like, you know what, I'm just going to do it anyway. I'm going to try it out. We'll see how it goes. If it works for me, great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I'll move on to the next thing. And he never gave up. You got to love that about the guy. Absolutely fantastic. And, Andrus definitely has this reputation as an SDUF ENTP of actually being really enabled within his childhood and very enabled by his parents. The problem is that after a while, it got to a point where he couldn't be enabled by his parents anymore, because he realized that enablement was actually inhibiting his own personal growth as a person. So he ventured forth to get out on his own, establish his own life, establish his own identity, establish himself as a person, his own person, so that he could actually take himself to the next level. And he has multiple times. If you ever want to ask him about his story, because I'm not going to go into details, but just DM him on Discord. Just DM him, have a conversation. Hey, CSJ was talking about you in the recent ENTP Octagram lecture. Tell me your story. And I'm sure he'd be happy to tell you his story from an SDUF perspective. SDUF ENTPs realize that giving their loyalty and compassion to others no longer provided enough satisfaction for them. The development of their INTJ shadow became vital to siphon in new paths to satisfaction. Envy plus fanaticism pulls the SDUF ENTP to be fanatic toward the things, people, and opportunities they are envious of. They shift from compassion to envy, as the ENTPs being dutiful is not always going to satisfy. Again, this is why they are leaning in to their God function of introvert intuition, which is personal freedom. Valuing personal freedom above all. And following their hearts, following their envy to gain additional personal freedom, because they believe that personal freedom is the path from which they will actually reach their cognitive origin, their primary cognitive origin of satisfaction. Don't forget, SDSF ENTPs prefer to have 3-part satisfaction, but SDUF ENTPs want 2-part satisfaction, 1-part reference, basically, in terms of what they're looking for from their cognitive origins perspective. That means SDSF ENTPs actually kind of don't really care about reference as much as they care about being satisfied, which is really important. So envy forces them to use their INTJ shadow and actually lead with what they want, separate from what they should do. Envy informs the ENTP the way things were can never be the same without a lot of work. Envy drives them to achieve the things that will free them in the future and provide satisfaction through achievement. It's always fascinating because SDUF ENTPs all the time, I think out of all of the 4 octagram variants, care about creature comforts the most. I've seen SDSF ENTPs really care about creature comforts too, but they are actually willing to sacrifice their creature comforts for the sake of others, which is really awesome because, again, that God function of extroverted feeling influence upon this octagram variant. I know I haven't talked about God function influence very much, but I just felt it absolutely necessary to bring up within the context of this particular lecture. So, from that point of view, personal freedom ends up becoming everything. And because personal freedom, that influence of introvert intuition as a God function on SDUF ENTPs, they eventually will forge their own path to reach the satisfaction they're looking for. And that's why they care so much more about those creature comforts along the way, because everything that they've gained, they really want to keep. It's kind of like, those who are in power. When they are in power, basically, people who are in power want to try to keep that power. Well, it's the same thing from an SDUF ENTP perspective. Everything that they've gained, all the progress that they've ever had in the context of their life, they ultimately want to keep it and come up with ways to secure everything that they've gained, right? And not to lose what they've gained. Whereas SDSF ENTPs are actually willing to lose it from time to time because they just have an abundance of joy. Okay, yeah, I'll let that go because I'll get more later. Big whoop, no worries. It's fine, it's all good. I got joy, it's all good. But from a decay perspective with an SDUF ENTP, that's not exactly the case. They kind of want to hold on a little bit more. Why? Because they miss the good times of their childhood and are trying to make sure that they're bringing the good times of their childhood into their adulthood as often as they can, which is super important. Let's move on to the next variant, which is the UDSF variant, the hope variant of the ENTP. Statistically, the most successful of all of the ENTPs. What are some examples of hopeful ENTPs out there? Well, from a fictional perspective, Tony Stark. Tony Stark from the MCU, as played by Robert Downey Jr., is UDSF. Even Robert Downey Jr. himself, he is UDSF from an octagram perspective because he is an ENTP, playing a UDSF version of himself as Tony Stark in the MCU. Very impressive performance. Another example would be Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate is also a UDSF ENTP. And it's really great that he never lost hope while he was incarcerated recently, and hopefully he stays not incarcerated. I would be really sad if he ended up being incarcerated after all with those bullshit allegations levied against him. But that's just kind of the reason why ENTPs in general wear masks, because people can't deal with us. People really can't deal with us. They can't deal with our pragmatism. They can't deal with the pragmatism combined with extroverted sensing demon. And because of that, we're just forced to wear masks and mask our roguish behavior, basically, so that we could actually have some semblance of personal freedom. But UDSF ENTPs care about the God function of extroverted feeling. Extroverted feeling as a God function has heavy influence on UDSF ENTPs. So they're all about increasing their own acceptability as well as increasing the acceptability of other people. Why do you think Andrew Tate, for example, goes out of his way to share everything he knows about masculinity, about getting rich, becoming successful, and going out of his way to help other people be as successful as possible? He's ultimately trying to give back. And that's what UDSF ENTPs end up doing. These are the people who have suffered a lot in their life, but because they suffered a lot in their life, they're the ones who are smiling still. They're the ones who still have hope for a better tomorrow and hope for their fellow man, right? And that's ultimately what Andrew Tate is trying to do as a UDSF ENTP. Pretty fantastic that there's someone like him in the world who's doing what he does to that end. And I am working on to aspiring to be UDSF myself, even though I am UDUF, right? So UDSF is malevolence plus compassion. Why? Because life was really malevolent to them earlier in their life, but somehow they were still able to be compassionate to other people in spite of their suffering. It's like they're flipping the bird to the universe to be like, yeah, you made my life miserable, but that doesn't mean I'm going to make anyone else's lives miserable in the process. I'm going to be there to make sure that other people don't have to suffer the same way I have. This is why oftentimes people actually tell me that they believe that I'm actually UDSF instead of UDUF. And you know what? They're probably right in different contexts. Like when I'm at home, my home life, I'm UDUF. But when I'm around people or when I'm around the ego hacker community, I try to take on that UDSF role as often as possible for the sake of the community and promoting a better future for tomorrow. Just like I always talk about with like my own children. People ask me, hey, do you think your children have a future? And I would say no. That's why I'm working so hard to build for them a future so that they actually have a future. Because I love my children that much, right? That's what it means, right? So the theme of malevolent, compassionate UDSF ENTPs is, by continuously proving myself, I create contentment. I create satisfaction by continuously proving myself, right? And that's what Andrew Tate is all about. And honestly, I'm starting to get closer and closer and closer to that as I prove myself as well. Constantly trying to prove myself. That's why I'm getting fit, for example. Getting a lot stronger. I mean, like, for example, I'm the only person at the gym who like takes a bunch of weights and creates this necklace of weights that I wear around my neck, and then I do pull-ups at the same time while wearing my necklace of weights, right? I've never seen anyone else at the gym do that, but I do it because I'm constantly trying to prove myself consistently. This is as I experiment with UDSF to get myself out of UDUF, even though oftentimes, let's be honest, a person who is UDUF can't really get out of UDUF by themselves. But, that's why even I, for example, am in therapy, and I love my therapist. He's a fantastic individual. He's an ISFP. He's, my natural pair, and really been able to provide me with a lot of guidance to actually hone and challenge and refine my masculinity for the sake of my children, also for the sake of the people closest to me in my life, including Railgun, for example. That's a really, really big deal. So, UDSF ENTPs developed into their INTJ shadow in childhood to power through the adversity of their childhood circumstances. Just listen to Andrew Tate's problems that he had as a child. Homelessness, not having money, dealing with stuff with his brother. It's a really rough story. They likely felt unwanted or at times unsafe in their environments. Their INTJ shadow became a necessary respite to endure. As they developed into adolescence, the UDSF ENTP likely found an avenue, such as a skill, hobby, or social circle, like kickboxing for Andrew Tate, that their INTJ shadow could lock onto and focus on developing their skills. Their malevolence gives them satisfaction by seeing who is strong enough to withstand the truth and who isn't. Their malevolence is often about finding out what people are made of. UDSF ENTPs are often the most successful variant. They lead with a combination of duty, introverted sensing, but also their desire, drive, and pursuit of skill, INTJ shadow, driven by reverence. Yes, UDSF, like SDUF ENTP, still prefer 2 parts satisfaction to 1 part reverence, right? They still do. Similar to UDSF or SDUF ENTPs. The difference is, though, is that it has that God function of extroverted feeling about acceptability, their own acceptability, which is why they have the theme of trying to prove themselves consistently, right? It's all about proving themselves. It's a big deal. Many of the best ENTP performers are UDSF variant. Their performance is a source of reverence, and that reverence brings them satisfaction. It's ultimately everything that they could stand for. That's what they hope for the most. By proving themselves, they're able to hone their performance and perform well, not just for themselves, but they're also able to perform well for other people, right? It is absolutely critical. It is absolutely crucial for them to be able to do this. But again, it's all from the drive of the God function influence of extroverted feeling on their life. They want to increase their own acceptability, and then after a while, using magician archetype, for example, from the mature masculine, help other people increase their level of acceptability, which is something that comes natural, for example, from INTJs, right? Not unlike Rollo Tomasi, an INTJ who wrote The Rational Male, trying to increase the acceptability of men throughout the world and the struggles of men and helping men get through those various struggles, right? And that's ultimately where that comes from, that God function influence of extroverted feeling. And now on to my octagram variant, the UDUF, unconscious developed, unconscious focus, also known as the path of pain, the path of scars, the path of wounds, the path of suffering, but also the path of great wisdom. You know, there's a lot of different variants to consider when it comes, or a lot of different things to consider when it comes to being UDUF. You know, we've been talking a lot recently about how UDUF is ultimately a temporary mind state. I've come recently to the conclusion that maybe being unconscious focused is actually a temporary mind state, and the mind is naturally trying to become subconscious focused, right? Subconscious focused is ultimately ends up having to be a goal of UDUF, to get one out of UDF and get one into UDSF so they can actually have a better life, because the UDUF octagram variant is the octagram variant of despair. And despair happens when you've just been beat down your whole life and you're locked into a cage, right? Your whole life, be it through your childhood and your adulthood. It's like you just can't even escape. You're literally that dog in a cage where you go to that dog in a cage, you try to pet the dog, but the dog is screaming at you, yelping at you, afraid that you're going to hurt it, to the point where the dog actually assumes you're going to hurt it. And that can actually be a very toxic, very unhealthy trait as a UDF person. I know, because I have been toxic in that regard, especially to people in my life on a regular basis, being toxic from that perspective. Because what business do I have assuming that people are going to abuse me, assuming that people are going to harm me? And then I presume, because ENTPs are presumptuous, I'm going to presume that people are going to be toxic to me ahead of time. So then I treat them as if they are going to be toxic, which then creates toxicity in myself. And then as a result, I treat other people from a toxic perspective because I'm assuming they're going, or presuming actually, that they're going to be toxic to me in the process. And that too can be a big deal. That too can be a big problem over time. That is definitely one of the biggest issues surrounding UDUF ENTPs. And honestly, it is my most toxic trait. And that's why I'm working very hard, feverishly hard, to become UDSF instead of UDUF, because I know this about myself. I know about this flaw. I know of my own propensity to be abusive to people in my life, specifically because I assume or presume that they are going to be toxic to me. And it's kind of like, you know, how like ESTPs, you know, who are UDUF as well, they have this thing where it's like, hey, I'm going to reject you before you have an opportunity to reject me, because the pain of rejection is just so great. And rejecting them is extremely painful. Whereas with UDUF, it's different. It's actually the pain that comes from dejection. Dejection. And I was dejected my entire upbringing. I weighed 300 pounds by the time I was in high school. Imagine, like, nobody would want me. No one would want to have anything to do with me. And I struggled with that obesity also throughout my 20s. And even in my 30s. I didn't actually start conquering obesity until within the last 2 years, basically. And now I have. I've conquered it. But I'm not done. Still working on getting that six-pack, you know what I'm saying? And I work hard to that end. Why? Because, like the UDSF octagram variant, to get myself closer to UDSF, I'm increasing my own level of acceptability. I am working really hard to be acceptable to myself as well as to other people, but it's all from the perspective of trying to prove myself, right? This is where I've learned lessons from people like Andrew Tate in the process to increase my own level of acceptability as a result, right? That's where that comes from. So what is the theme? UDUF ENTP, also known as the malevolence envy octagram variant of ENTPs. Respect is my only satisfaction. Oh God, so painful. My own father complains on a regular basis how I am so sensitive to disrespect. Not only that, my therapist actually complains about me being so sensitive to disrespect. Railgun also complains regularly about my sensitivity to disrespect because I'm extremely sensitive to disrespect. To the point, like, even in the Ego Hacker community on the Discord server, if someone starts disrespecting me, I just instantly ban them. Bye. You don't disrespect me. You don't disrespect me under my own roof. You don't disrespect anything I'm doing when I'm actually here trying to help you and build a better future for you, okay? You don't disrespect me. And I've had to learn that respect basically is the only way that I've been able to get satisfaction in my life. The problem is that while being UDUF, I end up desiring 2 parts reverence and 1 part satisfaction. It's still technically a very unhealthy mindset, but I do it. I'll tell you why I do it. Why do I care about respect? Because I don't want to be a doormat. I was doormatted my entire life, right? I don't want to be a doormat. I don't want to be taken advantage of. I don't want to be used, right? My ESFP superego, because UDUF is basically superego focus, right? I don't want to be, and my ESFP is like very interest-based, and it's aware of how people are attached to me and take from me, but they don't give anything back. I desire to have real bonds with other people, where it's a two-way street, where I am giving to them, but I'm also receiving to them at the same time. I don't want to have shallow attachments where it's just me giving to them. And oftentimes when it comes to my own king energy, using the archetypes of the mature masculine, for example, the king is absolutely important, right? Because the king with its shadow pole has the tyrant energy, where UDUF ENTPs become insanely controlling. INTJ women that I've dated in my life, their number one complaint about me is that I'm very controlling. And they would be right. I am very controlling because I'm heavily overprotective of my own introverted sensing. I don't like my introverted sensing being walked on. I don't like my effort being taken for granted, ever. And if my effort is taken for granted, I will literally cut that person out of my life and get rid of them. I don't want to even have them around. I give so much, and that tyrant energy where I become really controlling from a king archetype of the mature masculine. It's really there because I become a tyrant because oftentimes I feel like a slave to my own kingdom, where I set up this big table that everyone gets to eat from because I'm being generative as a king, but then I myself find that I'm not even able to eat from my own table. And that is the worst part. That's the worst part. This ends up creating very unhealthy, toxic behaviors where I end up becoming really, really controlling. And I don't want to be this way anymore. I don't want to be UDUF anymore. I want to be UDSF. And we're going to be talking about how to actually ego hack yourself to get you better on the path to actually changing your cognitive focus on your own instead of relying on external circumstances, external paradigm shifts to change your octagram, right? Granted, as a UDF person, you really can't get out of UDF by yourself. However, it is still your responsibility to make sure that you're doing your part to get you out of UDUF and not anyone else's part. Failure to do so is basically what this UDUF victim mindset is actually all about. And I'm guilty of that. I'm very guilty of that. That victim mindset where everyone has screwed me, everyone will screw me. It's this despair. It's this despair that we can't get away from. And it's a huge problem. It's not good. It's not right. It's very presumptuous. And given we have extroverted thinking critic, we have a hard time listening to others in the process. So we end up staying in this bottomless pit of UDUF and not even allowing ourselves to heal, basically. But we have to make sure that we are taking responsibility for our own healing and moving forward as a result when it comes to being UDUF. It's absolutely critical. So let's discuss some of the points. UDUF ENTPs were completely disabled in their early environment. Their comfort was often violated and their contributions were unappreciated. Their acts of service, their love language, their pearls that they had were trampled by the swine in their life, basically. There's often severe trauma with all UDUF variants, especially with SI inferiors, who often have to will through their traumas to be successful. Deeping deep into their wayfarer shadow and superego, UDUF ENTPs are easily mistyped as INTJs, ENTJs, even ESFPs. Their willpower and showmanship are exaggerated in their UDUF form. I'm exaggerating that right now because I'm literally in the busiest street corner in town right now and taking in a lot of attention because people are trying to figure out who the hell is this guy, because it's not normal for anyone to, be recording their podcast basically on a busy street corner. It just doesn't happen. But I found a way and I do it. And I'm absorbing all of the attention of the people that come by. Welcome to UDUF. For UDUF ENTPs, respect and the pursuit of notoriety often fuel their effort. Envy is their motivating force to obtain the things and the lifestyle they believe they were kept from them from their upbringing. God, ain't that the truth? Because they were experienced so little acceptance in childhood from their FE child, they are forced to lead with seeking respect, extroverted thinking critic, and reference. They often are a bit desensitized to being liked because it was foreign to them growing up. Respect is the currency they require to siphon into the cognitive origin of satisfaction. So that's the thing. How do you become UDUF? Well, for me, I had to sacrifice my extroverted feeling child in exchange for my superego demon's power, basically. I literally performed ritual demonic sacrifice, child sacrifice within my soul in exchange for the demon's power. Why did I do this? Because extroverted feeling child was entirely worthless to me. My father's extroverted feeling hero. My mother is extroverted feeling parent. My sister is extroverted feeling hero. My grandmother, extroverted feeling hero. My grandfather, extroverted feeling inferior. My cousins, all of them were FE inferior, FE child. My entire family is mostly extroverted feeling. Same with my aunts and uncles. There's actually only 2 FI users in my family, 1 uncle and 1 cousin, or actually 2 cousins and 1 uncle that were FI users. The rest of them were all FE users, all of them. And the FI users definitely took advantage of the situation, being the only FI users, and then they also became abusive as a result because they were just swimming in unlimited extroverted feeling, basically, and that caused a lot of problems, right? Everyone was just content with fueling their entitlement. And my extroverted feeling child had no room to actually be appreciated, to actually be regarded, to actually be utilized. So to me, my extroverted feeling child became worthless. So I sacrificed it to my demon in exchange for its power, basically. And that's what I did. And that was my survival mode. That's what UDUF is. It is survival mode. It is not thriving. Thriving is UDSF. And that's what I work on every single day for myself. And try to be that example to other UDUF people to show them that there is a way. There is hope. You can get out of that despair. You can break that despair. You can become something more than you are. You can have hope. And all you have to do really to start that process is just believe that it's possible. Like I have to believe that it's possible and not succumb to the despair in my life. It's very powerful, very necessary. I'd like to give special thanks to the community, especially our paid subscribers who have assisted me throughout this process. You know who you are. Thank you for caring about me. Thank you for caring about my extroverted feeling child throughout this entire process. I really appreciate it. And that's why I continue to go out of my way to be as compassionate as I can towards this community, as I learn how to be compassionate to just anyone, even outside of the community, especially to those closest to me. So, let's look at social engineering and the octagram. Social engineering applications of the octagram. If cognitive origin never changes, regardless of development and focus, then giving a person their origin through their preferred poles is the best way to reach them. So for example, subconscious developed ENTPs prefer fanaticism. This pole is best met by acknowledging the value of the things that ENTP is fanatical about and allowing them to share their interests and stories surrounding the objects, ideas, experiences, or movements that compel their fanaticism. or malevolence, unconscious developed. This pole is best met by not punishing the ENTP for being honest and even seeking them out for criticism and refinement. Both the four sides dynamics and the octagram are dynamic, but the octagram is even more so because it deals exclusively with nurture. The deeper implication of an octagram variant is to understand how the other temporal origins are siphoned in through the poles. For example, check out the ego. For example, check out the Ego Hacking by Text Masterclass, offers.csjoseph.life/EBT-masterclass. Dang, that's loud. Anyway, folks, that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys on the next episode for the Octagram of ENFPs. And thank you all for being paid subscribers and keeping the lights on. And thank you all for those of you that go out of your way to appreciate my extroverted feeling child. It definitely helps me in my own path to healing as well. So see y'all later on the next episode.